Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the game releases of 30 years ago today. This week, lots of menus, a scummy adventure game, and another mascot game gone wrong. Hi, I'm your host Jared, and today is December 9th, 1992. Never let clunkiness prevent you from trying something different. Released this week in 1992, was Gemfire for the Super Nintendo. Gemfire is a turn-based strategy game where you choose a faction and try to take over the entire map. Micromanage every part of your empire, allocating food, hiring soldiers, rearranging generals, do negotiations, and all kinds of other diplomatic boring things. Or, of course, you attack nearby territories and go into turn-based combat. You can move units individually, attacking from different angles matters, and try not to fall asleep with how slowly everything moves. Gemfire was developed and published by Koei, who is well known for similar games like Romance of the Three Kingdoms. There's a lot of familiarity with tons and tons of menus, and honestly, the graphics even look the same. It also means it has the same kind of slow-paced gameplay, perfect for strategy game enthusiasts or people who really like the board game Risk. A major difference for Gemfire compared to other Koei strategy games is that it's not based on any historic period or battle. It's pure fantasy, with the plot being about special gems being created into a crown that everyone is after, wizards, princesses, and you could even recruit monsters into your army. Gemfire was released in Japan as Super Royal Blood. The SNES version is also one of many ports. It was originally released onto PCs in Japan, like the PC-88 and the MSX, and in 1992, there were ports made for the NES, Sega Genesis, and DOS computers. Look, I like strategy games, but it's hard to have fun with them when they're this slow, even on the Super Nintendo. And this is coming from someone who really likes another Koei game, Aerobiz. And I'm not alone in thinking this either. Upon release, Gemfire did review pretty well. GamePro magazine gave it lots of general praise, and so did Nintendo Power. But even Nintendo Power had to admit that the game is slow going a lot of the time. It didn't sell very well in the West, despite it being on numerous platforms. In Japan, however, it did well enough to warrant a sequel, titled Royal Blood 2 for PCs in 1999, where it has remained ever since. Also getting a port was the TurboGrafx CD, which saw its own version of Loom this week in 1992. Loom is a point-and-click adventure game from LucasArts, hot off the heels of games like Maniac Mansion and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. This means lots of walking around, interacting with every possible thing in the environment, and talking to every NPC until every dialogue option is exhausted. Loom, however, avoids the previous trappings of the item-based inventory and various verbs associated with them. Instead, it's based around using a magical instrument to play music. When notes are arranged in a certain order, magic spells are created to solve puzzles. Loom was originally released in 1990 for home computers on floppy disks, and is the fourth game to use the SCUM engine for adventure games. It was then re-released in 1992 as a CD-ROM version, which notably added voice acting throughout the entire game. The TurboGrafx CD version, however, is based on the floppy disk version. While it has improved music, there is no voice acting. The original Loom also included a cassette tape that had a 30-minute audio drama setting up the world of Loom, and the game's story picks up right where the audio drama leads off. On side B of that same tape was the game's soundtrack. Sadly, the TurboGrafx version does not include this tape at all. This is one that I've never personally played. I mostly played Sierra adventure games like King's Quest VI, so this was all new to me. Gotta admit, the music theme throughout is pretty cool, though it is hard to play knowing there's a well voice-acted version out there. Reviews for the TurboGrafx CD version were a bit mixed. GamePro, as is typical of them, gave it another near-perfect score. Electronic Gaming Monthly was a bit more divided. While some aspects of it were praised, the main drawback was the game's slow pace. I mean, it's a point-and-click adventure game. I'm not really sure what they expected. LucasArts followed this up by saying that Loom was a critical success, but not a commercial one. It didn't sell nearly as many units as they were hoping for. They had two sequels planned, Forge and The Fold, but were both canned. That's probably why there's an NPC in Secret of Monkey Island that tells you to buy Loom. Another week, another platformer. Released this week in 1992 was Chest Cheetah, Too Cool to Fool for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. Chester Cheetah Too Cool to Fool stars the cartoon mascot for Cheetos, Chester Cheetah. It's essentially a platformer where you control Chester through numerous stages, jumping on enemies, very slowly walking forward, and collecting Cheetos. Power-ups can only be described as very stupid. A guitar makes Chester get stuck in place while he jams out, only injuring enemies that get near him, and a pair of sunglasses that makes the screen get really dark and hard to see, but you're supposed to be able to find hidden items this way. He can also crawl in the sewers by pelvic thrusting the ground. Spend every level finding pieces of his busted motorcycle, rebuild it, and ride away from, quote, Squaresville. Chester Cheetah was introduced as the mascot for Cheetos, a cheese-based crunchy corn puff snack in 1985. He spoke in basic hip-hop rhyme to come off as cool for kids, as he got into hijinks ripped straight off of Wile E. Coyote. No idea if he was actually popular enough at the time to warrant his own video game, but that's never stopped corporations from making a lot of unnecessary brand mascot video games. In all likelihood, this game was definitely made to promote Cheeto products, specifically Cheeto Paws, which were introduced in 1990.
Chester Cheetah here with 2 cool laws for new Cheetos brand paws. First, paws bring big fun to young tongues. Like check out Ross and this hip toss. That's real boss. Whew, let's do law 2. When filling your jaws with paws, it's only fair to share. So put it there, Claire.
New Cheetos Paws, the cheese that goes crunch.
While not exactly discontinued, ever since the mid-1990s, Cheeto Paws have been harder and harder to find. Look, the gameplay sucks pretty bad, but you can get a few laughs out of the instruction manual's poor translation while still attempting to rhyme. As is Chester Cheetah way, this is a one-person play. Also, the back cover had a coupon for 50 cents off a bag of Cheeto Paws. Upon release, it got way better reviews than it really should have. Electronic Gaming Monthly reviewed it in January of 1993 with a lot of high scores. Now, I'm not saying that they were paid a lot of money for these scores, but I will point out that GamePro magazine made it their cover for issue 41. Somehow, there would be a sequel released in 1993 called Chester Cheetah Wild Wild Quest. It also sucks, which makes sense. After all, it ain't easy being cheesy. As for everything else, here's Editor Dylan.
Also released this week was a whole lot of balls. Mostly sports balls. For the sake of time, I'm just gonna lump the majority of December sports games into this week. Cool? Cool. So let's start with Cal Ripken Jr. Baseball for the SNES and Genesis. It features a white ball that fits nicely in the palm of your hand or glove. As for the game, it's baseball. Moving on. Also for the Genesis SNES is Pro Quarterback, which means we're stretching that ball out and cocooning it with the skin of a pig. Wow, that's pretty metal. But if this football game doesn't have enough dialogue to truly immerse you, then Joe Montana's got you covered with NFL Sports Talk Football 93, starring some robot by the sound of it.
Good blocking. Look out. He's down. There's no score.
Let's get back to less metal, but much more spherical balls with NBA All-Star Challenge. I think it's the first basketball game I've encountered that lets you play horse by shooting three-pointers from various angles. Kinda cool. A basketball game release within the NBA playoff series was Bulls vs. Blazers, Chicago vs. Portland, Deep Dish Pizza versus, Weird Donuts, I guess? Of all the sports games I've attended when I was a kid, Blazers games were my favorite by far. Not because I liked basketball, but because everyone in the audience would get a free chalupa from Taco Bell if they scored 100 points. I wonder if they still do that. The last ball game this week was Crew Ball. Okay, now that's metal. And so is this pinball game, for that matter. It's reminiscent of a game we covered earlier this year in July called Dragon's Fury. And though I think that one is slightly more metal, they both offer great pinball action. Which brings us to a grand total of 11 games on these 3 consoles this week in 1992. Okay, I looked it up and apparently the Blazers haven't given out chalupas in like a decade. Though they have given out McDonald's, like a 6-piece nugs or some breakfast sandwich or something, maybe some fries. But if I'm honest, it's just not the same as a chalupa. We aren't sponsored, but if you'll excuse me, I gotta get some tacos. I'll try to save you one.
Thank you, Dylan. Here in the collector's corner, Gemfire has a solid price still. It currently goes for $50 for the SNES cartridge alone, and a complete copy is just over $90. This is 50% more than the Sega version, but only 1/3 the value of the rare NES copy. Loom is this week's biggest value gainer. It released with a retail price of $59.99, and now the disc alone is just under $120. And oddly, the same price goes for a complete version. Relatively speaking, Too Cool to Fool isn't fooling anyone. A loose copy is $25, but the complete version is a little over $60, provided you still got that sick coupon in it. And that's it for today. Next week, a portable blue bomber, an obscure handheld RPG, and one of SNK's fighting franchises comes home. I'm your host, Jared, and this was Now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. Please like the video and leave a comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. If you already are a subscriber, thank you so much. I never personally played the Chest Cheetah video games growing up. That said, I love those dang Chest Cheetah commercials, and there was a time in my life where every single week I made sure to have a bag of Cheeto paws, ruining my controllers.